Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you back. And today is not good news by any means from Britain. Brexit is certainly in crisis due to the incompetence of Theresa May. And I can tell you that when Theresa May came into office, I think that even people who are not from Britain or who I've never been to the UK. I think a lot of us were very skeptical of her capability and her, I would say also her honesty when it comes to delivering the Brexit deal that the people voted for. Now, what were the key elements of Brexit? First of all, and this is probably going to be in the New Deal that she is trying to pitch to the European Union. This deal would have the UK leave the European Union's institutions. So that would be its parliament. It would be a number of its legal bodies. I think that the European Court was agreed upon that they would leave. But the main sticking point that was created, there was an issue that was manufactured by the Conservative Party's Remoaner wing, as they call it in England and the rest of Britain, was the customs union. A lot of people started to say, well, we could either have soft Brexit or we can have hard Brexit. What would soft Brexit be? In their minds, it would be leaving the European Union's actual institutions, but remaining within its customs union, meaning that you already have a trade arrangement with the rest of Europe, and you wouldn't be adding any tariffs that are levied externally. That was the option. And the logic behind that was, well, we don't want to have to start from scratch and negotiate a new trade deal. The absurd logic behind this is that they expect that the European Union would not skew certain industrial terms and pass laws within the European Parliament to punish the British when, the British don't even have a vote anymore in order to prevent that type of abuse. So essentially, Theresa May and a lot of the other Brexit, skeptics, the Remoaners, the people who never got over the fact that they lost that election, their whole bag was, well, we're going to keep Britain almost entirely dependent on this trade deal with Europe in order to prevent us from becoming truly an independent country in their minds. I'm not British, I can't speak for them, but the objective of voting to leave the European Union was total independence from the EU. And part of being in that customs union actually hampers any trade deals with other countries in the world. For example, Pakistan, or with, China, the US, India, any of the countries that, Japan, any country that's not a member of the EU. Not now, basically, the British are almost hogtied by the customs union with whom they're overly dependent at the moment. And this was a total disaster. And it could only be a total disaster by entrusting this process in the hands of somebody as incompetent as Theresa May. When she ran for the chairmanship of the leadership of the Conservative Party after David Cameron resigned following Brexit, many people saw Theresa May as a person who could bridge the two wings of the Tory party. There was the Remain wing, which she was actually a part of, and then there was the Leave wing headed by Boris Johnson. And people did give her an honest shot. There were a lot of people who did not really think that she would be able to deliver, but they gave her the best shot that they could. What's up, Ryu and Jeffrey? So what's happened is that she had to have a deal that was approved, I think, by the Exchequer, or Checkers as they call it in England. And in fact, they handed back a deal that was so bad that the Brexit minister quit, There was who was the other person that quit? Boris Johnson himself, who was the foreign secretary, quit. Then now there are two vice chairs of the Conservative Party in the parliament that have quit, and they've said that they no longer have any confidence in Theresa May. And this is a prime minister that she owes a lot of her legitimacy to the fact that, I am going to be the responsible person who can deal with Brexit and everything. She was a failure before she was prime minister as well. She was the home secretary during one of the worst periods in British history in terms of ministerial responsibility. She was a horrible home minister. She's one of the reasons that the UK has such horrible free speech laws right now. And it's no surprise to me that a lot of the people who are part of the liberty right, the people who believe in repealing a lot of these free speech laws in Britain and returning it to a tradition that it's since abandoned, are joining UKIP, the UK Independence Party. So let's watch this clip for a second.
Very junior members of the government who have joined the list of people resigning because they don't like the direction in which Mrs May is going on Brexit. Two parliamentary private secretaries, Ben Bradley and Maria Caulfield, the MP for Lewis, have both resigned really in protest at what's been agreed. And I think this is a sign that there is, as we know, some substantial discontent within the Conservative Party about what's going on. Two other PPSs resigned earlier, Conor Burns and Chris Green. And of course, we also had ministerial resignations with Mr Baker, Mr Davis and Mr Johnson. So a group is forming, if you like, of overt Brexiteers out in the open. It's not really reaching critical mass at this stage, but it shows that there is continued turmoil. Of course, Theresa May's response and that of her managers and advisors is, well, there are plenty more where that came from. They'll just promote young talent.
Okay, so
and I would
let me just
suggest...
make sure. Essentially, this is the death knell of the Conservative Party if Theresa May remains in power. Those people that continue to work with her essentially are conceding that they don't believe in any ideas, so to speak. There's this graphic that I have above me on the screen, Theresa the Appeaser, was given to Theresa May by, I'm not sure who started it. I've heard Nigel Farage say it a lot because I do tune into his radio show once in a while. This is a photo of her head superimposed on Neville Chamberlain's head, and this is exactly the type of attitude that she's encompassed. She's the reincarnation of Neville Chamberlain with a vagina. And Neville Chamberlain, what was his whole attitude? His whole attitude was, well, we have to concede things in order for there to be, in order to avoid a repeat of World War I. Now, you can criticize Winston Churchill all you want, but he understood that when you continue to give concession after concession due to threats, that's not an effective way to negotiate anything, whether it's a foreign policy or a trade relationship, nothing. You have to be able to stand on certain principles and say, no, we're not going to agree to these terms, and there's no deal. And with Theresa May, it was a much easier decision because you're not facing you're not really facing the threat of an invasion by Germany or France in the case of Britain today. Instead, you're facing the prospect of a problematic trade relationship in the foreseeable future with certain parts of the world. But things like that can be resolved. And the fact that she's ignoring what's happened on the continent shows to me that Theresa May is really, she may be one of the most tone deaf, one of the most incompetent people ever to lead a government in any country in the world. And you see people are very much worried about what she's leading this country to. The the UK and the rest of the British Commonwealth. It says that the two MPs have resigned from their jobs as vice chairs of the Tory party over Theresa May's proposed Brexit deal as the crisis continues to cause chaos in Westminster and the Prime Minister struggles to unite her party. This comes a day after the shock resignation of the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson and the Brexit Secretary David Davis, and just hours after Mrs. May chaired her first meeting with the new cabinet. In his resignation letter, Mr. Bradley wrote, "I fear this agreement will be the worst of all worlds. If we do not deliver Brexit in spirit as well as in name, then we are handing Jeremy Corbyn the keys to number 10. He said that as the MP for Mansfield, where the majority of people voted leave in the EU referendum, he believes that he owes it to them to speak freely about this policy and fulfill the promise that he made to them. He said, I have taken this decision with great regret as I have very much enjoyed my work at CCHQ. I'm not sure what that is. I think it's Conservative Caucus headquarters. Miss Caulfield wrote in her resignation letter, since the announcement on Friday, my constituents, whether they voted leave or remain, have contacted me in large numbers to say they do not support the deal and it would therefore be more appropriate to have a vice chairman who can confidently defend the proposal. As the cabinet falls apart, Miss May has enjoyed spending the day at the ceremony marking the 100th anniversary of the RAF, the Royal Air Force. She said that the Chequers policy will be bad for the country and bad for the party. I think that's not referring to Theresa May. That's referring to Maria Caulfield. She said the direct confidence of that will be Prime Minister Corbyn. A Tory backbencher has submitted a letter of no confidence in the Prime Minister. Andrew Bridgen, Member of Parliament for North West Leicestershire, said the party had to deliver Brexit or face the prospect of being punished at the polls at the next general election. He wrote, all we have asked from the Prime Minister is that she sticks to what she has promised on repeated occasions when she declared that Brexit means Brexit and pledged to take back control of our money, borders, and laws. But now it appears those promises are all a pretense and a charade intended to dupe the electorate, which is an insult to their intelligence. Mrs. May was heckled today from the Labour Party in the House of Commons with yells of resign. The Prime Minister did win initial support from her cabinet for the 12-point Brexit plan, which came about following an emergency meeting at Chequers. The plan included Mrs. May proposing a mobility framework so that UK and EU citizens can continue to travel to each other's territories. So I think, I might have confused some of the details. Freedom of movement was one of the reasons that the British voted overwhelmingly to leave the EU. And by overwhelmingly, I mean 52% to 47% is an overwhelming margin. It's not, people think it might have been, it was 52 to 48. But in any case, it was a clear enough majority that anyone that thinks that, oh, well, they're not really respecting the wishes of the minority. Well, I like to ask people, a lot of the people who whined about, the fact that they voted to leave were crying about Scotland voting to remain and that Northern Ireland had voted to remain. But if the result had been the opposite, would they have granted independence to Wales, which voted to leave? Would they have granted independence to England, which also voted to leave? If they would have remained with a slimmer majority within those countries of the UK, but the overall result had been that they're going to remain? No, of course not. They would have said, well, you lost. You're going to have to remain within the European Union. And that's the very undemocratic nature of the European Union. That's why other countries will continue to test the bounds of the EU's attempts to constrain them. I predicted 2 years ago, around this time, that Italy would be the next country to challenge the strength of the EU. I didn't predict it on YouTube. I was on Facebook back then, but I did say that. And many people would probably have agreed with me back then. There was a very strong indication at the time that Italy was not looking to remain the EU's bitch and that they were not unlike the French who like to paper over all of their problems, the Italians are, they're not going to make any bones about, oh, we don't want immigration to ruin our country. And that's the real shame of it, that Theresa May can't recognize that Europe itself is erupting in basically, a wave of complete and total turmoil. It was originally just because of the migrants. Now it's also an issue of who really is the central authority in Europe. There was the Catalonia crisis last year. You don't think that a lot of the people, both in Catalonia and in the rest of present-day Spain, are thinking about leaving the EU now because of the just confusing and convoluted policy of the EU, where you see citizens basically being beaten in the street and the EU has nothing to say about it? Well, I think that people are starting to, they've woken up all over the continent, but the one person who has never woken up was Theresa May. She's just out of her mind. So you guys are having fun. Got, you see here, Loafer Wolf. I think I've seen him on my channel before. Anyway, here's another article about it in The Guardian. Theresa May promises a, quote, orderly Brexit as 2 more Tories quit. Well, if she has a government that's made up mostly of former Remain people, she's not going to be able to deliver Brexit. She's essentially going to be leaving her party ripe for a complete and total ass whooping in the next election, either by Labour, which, in my mind, that would be a disaster on a global level for Jeremy Corbyn to be delivered into the Prime Minister's office. That would cement her as the worst leader in the history of anything. She would be basically the Ryan Leaf of politics. I don't know any other way to describe it. And anybody watching in Britain, you'd have to look up on Wikipedia who Ryan Leaf is, because you guys don't know who he is. Anyway, this is Nigel Farage's opinion, and this is from Fox News, but I'm not picking it because it's Fox News. It's just because it's Farage. I usually don't watch Fox News.
Main on President Trump, who now heads to Brussels later today, where he'll come face-to-face with NATO leaders after putting them on notice.
I'll see NATO, and I'm going to tell NATO, you got to start paying your bills. The United States is not going to take care of everything.
So is the president right? Joining us now is former UK Independence Party leader and Fox News contributor Nigel Farage. Nigel, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Good morning.
Sunny Bermuda, to say the least.
Sounds nice.
So the president has been very tough on our NATO allies, trying to get them to cough up more money on defense spending. Why do you think the president is right to be tough on this issue?
Well, the president's not being tough on the issue. The president is merely quoting the rules of the club. To be part of NATO, you've got to spend 2% of your GDP on defence. The fact is there are 29 members of NATO and only 6 of them are actually paying the membership fee. So the argument is, why should America protect all these countries if they're not prepared to make a fair contribution? I think it's a wholly reasonable argument, but it's set, you see, against the background of the European Union wants to build its own army, its own European army, and Mr. Juncker, who heads the European Commission, is saying you only need to pay 1%. So what you're going to hear in the next 48 hours are various European leaders saying Trump is threatening the security.
So I want to focus on this graphic. I didn't know that this would come up, but I'd like to mention this because there's a lot of areas where, I for one, I do believe in cutting the defense budget. That's one of my beliefs. That's where I differ with, I disagree with Donald Trump. I'm not ashamed to say that I disagree with Donald Trump on it, and I'm not going to change my mind. We should be cutting our defense budget. It doesn't make any sense to just continue, buying too many weapons when, it's not just a matter of buying more weapons. It's a matter of keeping our troops in countries where I frankly could give a fuck that. We still have troops in Italy. No offense to Italy, but I don't think we need our troops over in your neck of the woods protecting you. And you can see here that the U.S. spends 3.57% of its GDP on defense. Whereas, the next closest nation is ironically Greece for whatever reason. And Britain has 2.12%. And then it gradually just falls. All the other nations besides Greece and Britain and Estonia are below their NATO guideline. In my opinion, if we would just bring down U.S. defense expenditure to 2%, that would make me a little more happy. I would say, I'd probably be very happy about that. But we're not going to because that's not a Trump policy, and I think it's a major mistake. I think that it's been a mistake of every one of our presidents not reducing the defense budget or bringing more troops home from places like Italy or Turkey or for that matter Germany. Why do we need our troops there? There's no reason. Germany is not going to be at war tomorrow, and if it was, I don't see why it's our job. What is it now? 83 years after 73 years after World War II. It's our job to keep Germany safe. Enough is enough. You have all these countries that they've had ample time to develop their own defense policy, and I'm not going to just pretend that because support our troops XYZ. We need to have more and more defense expenditure. So I agree with Donald Trump, not with Donald Trump on this. I agree with this policy of forcing the other NATO allies at least to follow this NATO guideline. But I think beyond that, the U.S. has to reduce its defense budget dramatically. Another thing I'd like to say is, you notice that they talk about all these countries having, better healthcare systems because they spend much less on defense. So I don't know if I see even Sweden in here, because I'm not sure Sweden is even in the EU or in NATO. So, but you do see Denmark here with 1.17% of their defense budget. So the fact of the matter is, one of the reasons that Denmark is able to afford that healthcare system is because it is cheating on the NATO guideline. And that's an international agreement, so they're cheating on their international agreement. So you can like it, you can hate it, you can say, if we want to violate the agreement, so be it, violate the agreement. But you have to at least acknowledge that fact. Another country there that people talk about all the time for its free healthcare, Canada, 1.29%. That's also cheating on the agreement. You see Germany, 1.24%, also cheating on the agreement. And by the way, 1.24% of the GDP. In their case, they don't really have a military to speak of that has any real defense capabilities against any of its neighbors, any of its main neighbors. The main powers in Europe, Britain, France, and Germany would not be able to sustain a long-term war against, let's say, Russia. Although I don't want a war with Russia, I'm just saying that, yes, they have full universal health care systems, but France suffers from strikes all the time because they can't pay for their workers. They can't, there's always these demands for more and more money for public employees and for various unions and whatever. France is a disaster in terms of labor. But people like to, that's one of the reasons that you never hear about France. You hear about the Nordic countries, Sweden and Denmark, and one day people are going to really wise up to what's actually happening there, where in Sweden the retirement age has been raised very recently. I think it was raised to 68 years now, which it's not as bad as some other countries, but still, people are behaving as if Sweden has acclimated well to the rising entitlements to the migrant class. No, eventually that's going to run out, and they'll also have a very, very weak defense system, and socially, they've virtually evaporated, unless they can vote otherwise in this election this summer, which it looks like they will. So I'm just going to continue here.
Of people in Europe, the truth is, it's the ambitions of the European project that's doing it. And I believe that the president should be very firm indeed.
You know, it's crazy when you look at the numbers because you see the United States at about 3.5%. You guys hit the mark at 2.12. Yeah. We've both got pretty big economies. So we're talking about on a big scale, 3.5% and 2%. And then you've got all these smaller countries who are just getting the deal of a lifetime, paying maybe 1% of a very tiny GDP to join a club that gets you the backing of militaries that are worth trillions of dollars. I mean, what a sweet deal. And how could anybody not call them out is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's freeloading, isn't it? But it's not just the small European countries that are cheating. Germany, 80 million people, the biggest country in Europe, and Germany is only paying 1.2%. And I think that President Trump and Angela Merkel need to have a very frank discussion about that. Otherwise, as I say, European countries are freeloading off American taxpayers.
Now, some say that President Trump isn't going to want to ruffle any feathers at this NATO meeting because he's meeting with Vladimir Putin very, very soon. What do you think about that?
Well, look, the fact that he's meeting Putin must be a good thing. Whether we like Putin or not, the whole point about Trump's strategy is you go out there, you meet people, you talk to people, maybe, just maybe, you build a personal relationship, and that makes things better. There are many in Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe, who are still very paranoid about Putin.
That's a pretty hilarious photo there in Vietnam with Putin, Xi Jinping, Duterte. I don't know who the guy in front. That guy in front, I don't think is. He might be from Thailand or something, and or this guy. I have no clue who he is, but basically Trump with a bunch of hardcore Asian dictators and Vladimir Putin. And that's the type of thing that this is the way the left sees him now, is basically another Asian dictator. Well, the fact of the matter is that we've had to deal with hardcore authoritarian regimes all over the world since the beginning of this country. Every single administration and every country in the world has to deal with dictators. And this is what they're going to start saying, that he has to, he's making us the what do they call it? The enabler of abusers or something. Well, I would say that unfortunately, we have been enabling abusers since the beginning of our country, and the best way Trump could mitigate that is to transfer our relationship from enabler through arms deals to enabler through regular civil trade, and then maybe that would change something. But, no guarantees. We can't manage other countries' internal affairs.
Putin and about Russia. I think the truth of it is it's the Ukraine. It's that whole issue of the Ukraine and the Crimea that has led to such a terrible deterioration of conditions. But I do think the one thing that the president needs to do is he needs to get a public assurance from Putin that Russia will not meddle in British or American elections in the future. And that, I think, is very important.
Absolutely. Everybody looking for that. Going to your country now, a bit of turmoil in England as a couple of Brexiters, one your buddy, Boris Johnson, just quit his job yesterday. And everybody's saying now Theresa May's job could be in jeopardy. Your system works much different than the United States. Explain to us how this all works with Theresa May and why she's at risk at this point.
Well, she took over after the referendum as Prime Minister. We voted to leave the European Union. She herself had supported the Remain side. So it was a very odd choice, in a way, for her to become the Prime Minister. She promised from day one she would deliver the kind of Brexit people had voted for. And what she presented to her cabinet on Friday, frankly, amounted to a betrayal of many of the things that had been promised, even in her own general election manifesto. So there's an issue. Boris Johnson and David Davis have resigned. I believe they're right to do so. I'm now of the view that if she stays as Prime Minister, we will not get the Brexit we voted for. We will not be able to sign a trade deal with America and other big countries around the world. So what it now needs, it needs 48 Conservative members of Parliament to sign a letter of no confidence, and that would then trigger a big debate within the Conservative Party about whether she can continue or not. My guess, right now, is that the tide is now moving against her. And I think there's little chance that she'll survive more than a few weeks.
And that's what you want. You would love that, right? You'd love her out.
I would love her to go. I think she has been utterly duplicitous, dishonest with the British public over Brexit. And I'll be honest with you, I think she's the worst Prime Minister we've had in my entire lifetime.
And President Trump also heading to London very soon. So,
all right. So just to be clear, what does that mean now? So they have to submit. 48 people have to submit a letter to the 1922 committee, which is basically what is, they're in charge of the Conservative Party in Parliament. A little similar to the way that the House Republican caucus works here, or the House Democratic caucus. Let's say the Democrats wanted to get rid of Nancy Pelosi, say, well, you're not the House Minority Leader, or the Republicans wanted to say, well, Paul Ryan, you have to resign as Speaker. Well, in Britain, the way you do this to the leader of the Conservative Party, you need 48 members in order to go to this 1922 committee and tell them, hey, we want this person out. And that would trigger a debate over removing her. And I think at that point she would probably end up having to resign, because the other thing that people forget about the British government right now is that they're dependent on the Democratic Unionist Party. And the Democratic Unionist Party is very dead set against both immigration from Europe as well as an open border with Ireland that would be too porous. The Democratic Unionist Party is probably more of a Brexiteer party than the Conservatives. So if they decide, we're not going to hold up your government anymore because Theresa May didn't have enough members of Parliament elected in order to form a government by herself with the Conservative Party, I think that for sure would mean the end of her. And you know what? After that, it's going to be a real problem. If Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister, I don't know how long he would last. I don't think that, I think he's obviously a little better than Theresa May. But you don't need a little better than Theresa May. You need somebody who actually has leadership characteristics. The person that's most cited in terms of leadership characteristics in the British government, in the Conservative Party, is Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is basically, I'll show you his face. He's kind of this, upper class aristocrat, but he's one of the most well-spoken leaders in the UK. And I've heard him on the radio. He's a hard-line Catholic, basically, but he's one of the more educated leaders in Western politics today. Now, I'm not going to tell you that you have to like every single thing about him, but you could probably be more assured that he's committed to at least the Brexit principles, as opposed to Theresa May, who is basically, she's revealed herself to be a liar or somebody with no backbone. Okay, so I think we're going to, let me see here. Just to give you a clue before we close, Nigel Farage was born in, it says here, 1964. So he's been through a few horrible British prime ministers. Edward Heath was not a good one. There was, of course, James Callaghan, who almost brought the country to financial ruin. Then there was, of course, Tony Blair. And who else? There's Tony Blair, Gordon Brown. And, a lot of people like to say, Margaret Thatcher was one of the worst, especially people on the left. Well, Margaret Thatcher didn't bring Britain into a war with Iraq. Okay, she did the Falklands War, which was, in technical terms, it was a defensive war. So that's about it for today in terms of Brexit. I think I'm going to do a separate stream on a couple other topics. I got to get my thoughts organized, though. But thanks for tuning in. I'll read your guys' names. We have Jeffrey, Larry, Ryu, Shiska, Metadata Man, Mad Dodge Productions, Loafer Wolf. I think that's it. I think I got all you guys. Thanks for tuning in, and I think I'll have another stream tonight. Not sure yet, but we'll see. And if not, could be one tomorrow night. And we'll be in touch. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment below, and share the video.